3 million years ago, a hungry hominid stood on a tropical beach, staring at a brown, hairy orb that defied every tool in his primitive arsenal. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he smashed that coconut against a basalt rock, he triggered a biological revolution that would eventually build the space shuttle. Evolution is rarely about the big leaps. It is about the small, violent, and messy experiments. Our ancestors were not master chefs. They were scavengers, opportunists, and above all, they were desperately hungry. For millions of years, the Australopithecus diet was limited to what they could forage or strip from a carcass: roots, tubers, and the occasional insect. These foods are fiber-heavy and nutrient-poor. To get enough calories, a creature has to spend almost every waking hour chewing. Then came the coconut. It is a fortress of biology. A thick, fibrous husk protects a hard, lignified shell. Inside, a layer of saturated, fat-rich meat waits behind a seal tighter than a bank vault. For an early hominid, this was a high-stakes puzzle. If you couldn't crack it, you starved. If you could crack it, you unlocked the most energy-dense fuel source on the planet. We often imagine human intelligence growing because we learned to make fire or paint on cave walls. But the real spark started in the gut. The human brain consumes 20% of our total daily energy, despite representing only 2% of our body weight. That kind of biological supercomputer is expensive. To run it, you need a massive caloric surplus. When our ancestor finally split that shell, he didn't just find a snack. He found the high-octane fuel that allowed the hominid brain to explode in size. Let's look at the timeline. Around 2.5 million years ago, the genus Homo appears in the fossil record. Coincidentally, this is exactly when we see the first evidence of systematic stone tool use, the Oldowan tradition. These weren't elegant spears or knives. They were sharp-edged cobbles and heavy hammerstones. They were designed for one thing: percussion, cracking open bones for marrow and smashing tough plant matter. Think about the dexterity required. You have to hold the coconut in one hand, the stone in the other, and calculate the exact angle of impact. You need spatial awareness. You need force modulation. You need the ability to recognize that a rock isn't just a rock. It is an extension of your own hand. This is the birth of technology. Before this moment, the primate diet was limited by the mechanical constraints of the jaw. If a plant was too fibrous or a nut too hard, your teeth were the limit. But once you outsource the crushing to a piece of granite, the physical requirement for massive jaw muscles starts to disappear. Look at the skulls of our ancestors. Over 3 million years, the sagittal crest, a ridge of bone on the top of the skull that anchors massive chewing muscles, begins to shrink. As the jaw gets smaller, the face flattens. And as the face flattens, something incredible happens to the skull. It gains room to expand. The brain case expands. The frontal lobe, responsible for planning and complex thought, begins to take center stage. We literally traded our bite force for brain power. We became weaker physically, but infinitely more dangerous strategically. This didn't happen overnight. It was a cycle of selection. The individuals who were smart enough to use tools survived to pass on their genes. Those who couldn't figure out the coconut or the bone marrow died out. This was the first time in history that natural selection favored the tech-savvy over the physically dominant. But it wasn't just about the calories, it was about the social structure. A coconut is a communal resource. You can't easily hide a coconut once you've smashed it open. You have to share it or defend it. This forced our ancestors to negotiate. They had to learn the basics of social hierarchy and cooperation. If you were the one with the hammerstone, you held power. But if you were the one who found the coconut, you held value. This is where the first hints of trade and social contract appear. The coconut moment wasn't just a meal, it was the birth of the supply chain. Consider the chemistry. The coconut contains medium-chain triglycerides. These fats are metabolized differently than the fats found in other plants. They go straight to the liver and are converted into ketones. Ketones are the preferred fuel source for the human brain. We are not just what we eat, we are what we figured out how to crack open. By the time Homo erectus emerged 1.9 million years ago, they were essentially a different species. They had lost the heavy fur of their ancestors. They had developed long, striding legs for travel. And most importantly, they had the brain size to begin manipulating their environment rather than just reacting to it. They weren't just searching for food, they were processing it. We look back at the Stone Age and see cavemen grunting in the dark. But the evidence suggests they were actually the most resourceful engineers the world has ever seen. They were fighting a war against entropy. Every calorie was a battle. Every successful smash was a tactical victory against starvation. The shift from gathering to processing also changed our circadian rhythms. When you have access to nutrient-dense food, you don't need to spend 14 hours a day eating. You suddenly have leisure time. What do you do with that time? You start watching your peers. You start observing the flight patterns of birds. You start tracking the cycles of the moon. You start telling stories. The coconut crack was the catalyst for the human narrative. Without the surplus energy provided by these high-fat, high-calorie foods, we would still be sitting in the shade, chewing on stalks of grass for 12 hours a day, waiting for our jaws to do the work. Instead, we stood up, picked up a rock, and started the long climb towards civilization. Today, we take our food for granted. We walk into a store, buy a carton of coconut milk, and never think about the sheer logistical impossibility of accessing that nutrition in the wild. We have outsourced our survival to such a degree that we have forgotten the fundamental struggle that built our cognitive hardware. We are living on the legacy of that one unnamed ancestor who took a rock to a shell. Think about the sheer number of tools required to get that coconut into your fridge today. The farming equipment, the shipping lanes, the supermarkets, the refrigeration. All of that is just an incredibly complex, high-speed, globalized version of that one caveman swinging a rock on a beach. We are still doing the same thing. We are just using much bigger stones. Every time we innovate, every time we invent a new way to process energy, be it steam, electricity, or nuclear fusion, we are essentially just cracking open another coconut. We are looking for a denser way to fuel our progress. But there is a warning in this history. When we became reliant on high-calorie processed foods, we created a biological mismatch. Our brains are hardwired to seek out the energy-dense fats that once saved us from extinction. But in a world of abundance, that same survival mechanism is now destroying our health. We are still the same creatures who struggled on the beach, living in a world that has finally provided more coconuts than we could ever possibly need. If we look at the trajectory of our species, the question isn't how far we've come. The question is what we will do next with the energy we have. We have the most powerful brains in the history of the planet, built on the back of 1 million years of scavenging and smashing. We have successfully cracked the shell of our environment. We have mastered the physics of our world, but we have yet to solve the internal puzzle of what we are actually supposed to do with all this power. The ancestor on the beach didn't have a plan. He was just hungry. He solved his immediate problem, and in doing so, he opened a door that can never be closed. Now that we have fully conquered the physical world, we have to decide whether we will continue to grow or if we have finally reached the limit of our own biological evolution. Are we still just hungry animals looking for the next nut to crack, or are we something more? The rock is in your hand, the beach is still here, and the history of the future is waiting to be smashed open.